Agia came once, and standing between two of Vodalus's armed women spat in my face as she described the torments she and Heather had contrived for me when I was strong enough to endure them. When she finished, I told her quite truthfully that I had spent most of my life assisting at operations more terrible, and advised her to obtain trained assistance, at which she went away. That is one of the wonderfully self-aware quotes of Severian, our main character. It is taken from the fourth book that I will be talking about today from Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, and the book is The Citadel of the Autarch. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of a novel review, the Book Podcast. My name is Seamus, I'm the host, and today we are rounding out Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun series with the fourth and final book of this four-book series, The Citadel of the Autarch. It has been an absolutely bewildering ride reading these books, but I will get into them a bit more in a minute. Well, I'll get into them a tiny bit more in a minute because they're very difficult books to speak about. But first, book podcast news. I received a book in the mail this week, which was very, very cool. It's got a fantastic cover. It's by the writer Timothy Stormcrow, and I spoke to him, and that is his real last name, which is pretty cool, I gotta say. Stormcrow, cool last name. And the book is The Lich Before Darkness. I believe that's how you pronounce the word. I'll hold the cover up for the benefit of those on YouTube. It is an absolutely, I think, wonderful cover. And I think it's sort of made me realize that a lot of books these days don't have great covers. They're either, I don't know. I know it's kind of unfair. I know everyone's just trying to sell books. I'm very much aware of that. But I was in sort of a bookshop the other day and I was perusing some of the fantasy books there, and Stephen Erickson's book, who wrote the Malazan Book of the Fallen books, a lot of the books surrounding his books had very similar style covers, I guess to try mock that of, not mock, to try copy that of Erickson's work. And the same thing happened with Brandon Sanderson's works. All the books sort of surrounding that had similar covers as well. And of course, I get they're trying to sell books, and you know, I can't begrudge anyone for that because that is the aim of the game, and you know, publishing is struggling at the moment. Physical books are struggling, and people do want to sell their books, of course. They've spent a lot of time and energy writing these books. They naturally want to sell them, and even though we're told not to judge books by the cover, we still do. But I do love an original cover that is just colourful and vibrant and detailed. I mean, I love sort of the very pulpy sci-fi fantasy covers of like the 80s, the 70s and 80s, just like the outrageous covers that, you know, make no sense, but are just like very colorful and outrageous. I absolutely love them. That being said, I also do love an incredibly clean cover for the right book. Very minimalist, you know, the Fitzcarraldo edition is just completely blue with just the title name. I do love books like that as well. So, you know, I'm kind of, it's all or nothing for me basically. But yeah, this book looks great. It looks really interesting. But the cover, I think, is the thing that won me over because it is just so vibrant and it looks electric. I mean, there's lightning coming down at stones. It looks absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's about three characters sort of going about their business in a world where sort of the fantastical and the magical is very much commonplace, and all the sort of issues, trials and tribulations that come along with that. So yeah, check that out if that sounds interesting to you. Maybe I'll put a link in the bio for it. But yeah, The Lich Before Darkness, cool title, great name, Timothy Stormcrow, and an even better cover. Bit of housekeeping very quickly. Thank you so much for clicking on. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to like and subscribe, I'd also greatly appreciate that. But as always, it's a free podcast. Let's just get on and enjoy the show. Okay, on to the main body of the episode. Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, Volume 2, Book number 4, The Citadel of the Autarch, the fourth and final book in this series, and I've been doing these for the last 4 months now. What a series it has been. First, I've just got to say a big thank you. I can't remember his name because it was just a random YouTube name, but the guy that recommended I read these, thank you so much. I had never heard of them and I had no idea what to expect when coming into them, and now that I'm finishing up my first read of them, I still have no idea what to expect because the books, as I said, are just utterly bewildering. I have no idea what's going on. I thought it was really funny. In the first episode, I've got my notes here. In the first episode, because the books, even though it's 4 books, they were written as to be one book, but naturally publishers like to break this up and it's, too big to publish as one book and you can make multiple sales out of stuff like that. It was written as one book. And so when I finished the first book, I did say it's very difficult to judge a series like this off the first book. It's almost not very genuine to judge a series off of the first book, because that's really only 25% of the story. And I think it's really funny because now that I'm at the end and I've finished the entire story, I still feel like I'm not qualified to judge the story, because in truth, I have missed what sounds like, based on what I've read now after having finished the books, I've missed about 50% of the story. That might be a very odd thing to say, but apparently it is a very common thing to say. This is what I wrote down for my experience. And this kind of goes to reading all 4 books, not just this 4th and final book. I have no idea what happened, but I experienced something like some psychedelic fever dream. And that kind of sums up my experience reading these books. I mean, definitely a psychedelic fever dream, because you're reading it and it's kind of making sense and you're following the story. And when you're in a dream, it's all making sense and nothing seems too weird. And then when you finish a chapter, you finish a book, you step back, you finish a dream, you wake up and you step back and you're like, what was actually going on there? That all was very, very weird. And it's apparently a very common thing in this series that you kind of miss the underlying story within the story, because on the surface, it is a very simple story, I would say. It's a very, maybe not generic, maybe generic's the wrong word, but it is very much just Severian going from A to B in every story, and therefore, of course, over the course of the 4 books, pretty much going from A to B. It's a very typical sort of heroic quest kind of story. He's just kind of journeying. He is known as a journeyman, so he is just kind of like journeying from A to B, and it's all the weird and wacky, wonderful things he gets up to along the way. And that's more or less what the story is about. This story as well, very similar. It picks up right where we left off at the end of the 3rd book. Severian goes on a couple journeys. He has a few near-death experiences. He finally gets to the war with the Asians, where he then meets the Autarch, and then sort of fulfills his destiny, which was revealed to us in book 1, but of course you're not, I guess, well, I wasn't technically aware that that was actually going to come to fruition. It's just kind of told to you in a story. I think it was book 1. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was book 1. And so he then fulfills his destiny, and that's where we leave this story, depart the lands of Earth. I also just want to quickly say thank you so much to everyone that has watched and commented on these videos, because it has been really nice to read these stories and be so humbled by them. You think you know what's going on and you just have no idea what's going on, but it's been really nice to read everyone's comments, because they've all been very constructive. There are definitely a few fandoms out there that love to let you know when you don't know something, and they do it in a very passive-aggressive way, and they love to sort of show off the fact that they know more than you. But I feel like when it comes to these Gene Wolfe's books, my experience has been everyone struggles. So therefore, it's sort of like everyone's trying to help everyone up the ladder in some sense. And some people have come with some really great recommendations. You know, I'm going to be upfront. I do want to read these books again. Apparently, they do have a great reread value, and you do get a lot more out of them the second time. And a lot of people said reread them a second time between sort of like 1 and 3 years later, and then actually read a 5th book that was written, which Gene Wolfe apparently didn't initially want to write, but his publisher made him write it to clear up the mystery of these 4 books. Read that book after your second reread to sort of make sense of it, so you can go in knowing the overarching story, and so you can focus more on the subtext, on the story beneath the story, and have a lot more fun with it that way. And I think that's just like some great recommendations, and a few people recommended that, and a few other people I saw in some chat forums were recommending that as well. And I think that's really great to be spreading that kind of information, and like just trying to help people read and understanding that, you know, we're allowed to be human and not understand something the first time. So thank you so much to everyone that commented. I really do appreciate it. I think it's exactly what literature is about. So that was fantastic. So naturally, I've kind of already admitted that I don't really understand the story. I don't understand the underlying story. So I'm just kind of going to try to speak to my experience reading this book, this 4th book, and the overarching stories of all 4 books together. What I found really interesting was that I got to the end of the 4th book, and, you know, it does end in a very interesting way, in that Severian has become Autarch, and he sort of, at least from my understanding, he's going off to do this now trial to prove whether he's a worthy Autarch and will bring on the new sun. And I guess for me, at the end of the 4th book, it still felt like I was at the beginning of the story, even though I was technically at the end of the story. And I don't know if that's something that Wolfe has done intentionally, but I very much got to the end of the 4th book and felt like it was almost like an extended prologue. And I guess that kind of speaks to the beauty and ease in which I could read the stories on a surface level. You know, they didn't feel long and drawn out, and that's a testament to Wolfe's writing. That it didn't feel like it really dragged me. For me, these last 4 months have really flown by, and my reading experience with these particular books has not felt labored at all. It has been relatively, I won't say quick, I didn't exactly rush through them, but it felt very much easy. And so now, having finished the 4 books, I do feel like it's like a prologue, and I want to know what happens next, which I guess is also a great thing. And I don't know if there is a next. And this is also just another side note. I know Wolfe has written many more books, and if any of them are good, please do recommend them as well, because I'm fascinated by his writing style. I think he's a really interesting writer. I love books that are like sort of puzzles or labyrinths or mazes that you can reread and sort of get something out of every single time. And I love the idea of coming back to literature, certain books in literature, and having a different and new and fresh experience with it every single time, while also like drawing similarities from, not similarities, like drawing sort of memories from sentiment, and having like a sentimental value towards books and stories, and like being able to connect with them based on your own historical life, in that you've read them years ago and it reminds you of a certain period of time. And I'm just kind of waffling, and I think I've sort of made the point that I'm trying to make, and I think you will understand what I'm trying to say. Books that you have a relationship with, and basically they teach you something different every single time. That's how you can sum it up quickly. And then just to build on that, I guess what I love about this story is that it does feel like there's so much hidden. It does feel like there's so much that's going on beneath the surface, and you just can't quite get at it. And that's why I'm almost excited to reread it. And, if I didn't have a book podcast where I'm reading different books for different reasons, I potentially would jump straight back in and start reading it again, because The Shadow of the Torturer was a great book, and I really enjoyed that first read of that book, and it was really special and really unique and really different, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I think coming to the end of this book, I had, a lot of questions going into the 4th book. There's a lot of things that need to be wrapped up, to be, tied up nicely, a couple of loose ends that need to be touched upon. I think the answers in this 4th book are more truths that are hinted at rather than direct answers. And I think that's actually wonderful, because I think if Wolfe had, at least, again, this is just my understanding, because, I feel like I miss so much, and I feel like I'm just saying so many foolish things that, other readers and lovers of these books might just think, oh God, this guy really didn't pay attention. I promise I did pay attention, but it feels like a lot of the answers are just truths that are hinted at, and they're not actually overtly explained in a very outright kind of way. And that even though he's giving you the answers, even though Wolfe is giving you the answers, he does still want you to work for it that little bit more, which I kind of love, but also kind of frustrates you that little bit, because you kind of want to know. It's like in a detective story, just before the big reveal, you kind of like, just get to the point, tell us who the murderer is. We want to know. We've spent the whole book reading this. We want to know. So I guess it's kind of like Wolfe was true to his nature in the end, that, there is no direct answer. He just, he hints at it, and he makes you work for it. And that's kind of what it's been the whole experience through the story. On a different note, I absolutely love Severian as the main character. I know he has a lot of issues, but I did find him a really, really fascinating character. I felt that I just could not trust him at all, even though he reminds us like every 10 pages that he remembers everything and has a perfect memory. And I think that just sort of made me trust him a lot less than if he just said it a couple of times. I love the idea of the sun slowly dying, and this idea that humans still populate our Earth in, millions of years' time, and it's kind of like a very far, far, far future human race that is still around as the sun is slowly burning out. I really did like that idea. I thought it was really fascinating, because that idea of humans still being around in millions of years, I don't know when the sun's going to finally burn out, but the idea of humans being around in millions of years is pretty much inconceivable at the moment, because the human brain can't even really conceive a million years. So yeah, I did find that really fun as well. I found that really, really interesting. I'm not going to lie though, at the end, I did feel a little sad for Severian. He does become Autarch, and it's kind of what we've been building to for the entirety of the last sort of 3.5 books, when it's sort of revealed in the first book that he is going to become Autarch. We've been building to this moment, really through through all 4 books. But I did feel a little sad when he got there, because, he consumed Thecla's flesh and took on her memories. But then to become the Autarch, he has to consume the previous Autarchs. He consumes some of his brains, and then takes on 1,000 personalities. And I think it knowing that this story is being told from the position of Severian now as the Autarch, he's writing down this this memoir in a way. It does feel slightly sad that it feels like he's almost trying to capture who he was before he became Autarch, and the part of him that is now, I guess, so diminished within his own body because he has to compete against 1,001 other personalities. I did find it a little bit sad because I did quite like him as a character, and I enjoyed journeying with him for the 4 books, and then to see him sort of reduced within his own body, I think, yeah, it was a little bit sad, but it also kind of made me reflect on this idea of, if you do want to get to a position of power, an Autarch, a king, a prime minister, a president, whatever, you kind of do have to take on many different personalities and sacrifice sort of who you truly are at heart. You have to take on many different personalities and show up in many different ways. So I did kind of find that interesting as well, that you kind of, I feel like, I don't know, I'm not in a position of power like that, but you do have to sacrifice some kind of inner peace, maybe, something like that. That I found really interesting, that Severian, of course, has now done to become the Autarch. And then through that, yeah, you kind of lose this sense of who you are, what your personal identity is. You lose sense of who you are as a person. And maybe that's why he's sitting down to now write this story of the journey of how he became this person that he now is. And he kind of wants to remember who he was before he became that person. So I found that kind of, not maybe sad was the wrong word, maybe a bit more somber, a bit more melancholic, but not directly sad, but just kind of like, okay, that this is the situation and we're going to progress from here. But it's, it's a little bit melancholic. But then, as sad as it is, there's also, I think, some wonderful humor in it. I mean, that first quote that I read at the start of the episode about Severian being wonderfully self-aware of his situation and being like, yeah, like, you're going to try to torture me. I pretty much know the game inside out. That's not torture. That's just a Tuesday for me. I think a lot of that humor comes in the overarching idea of the story itself. Severian is a torturer, and he's writing this story down about a torturer and torturing us as the reader. And I kind of absolutely love that he's torturing us as the reader with this outrageously complex story that masquerades as something really simple, but really is something incredibly dense. And he's just torturing us as a torturer. He's torturing us, and he's kind of remaining true to his roots as a torturer, even though he is now the Autarch, recalling the times, his now previous life. So all in all, it was an absolutely wild series. Like I said, it masquerades as something incredibly simple, but there is so much more going on. It comes in at just around 1,200 pages. Look, I'd recommend the first book for certain. Like, if you don't like it at the end of the first book, you don't have to read on, of course. And in fact, Severian actually writes that at the end of every book. He says it's a long and complex story. Don't feel you have to go on. In terms of the 4 books, I know they are technically one big story, but I think, I love them all individually for all very different reasons. I think now, upon reflection, the first one, The Shadow of the Torturer, is my favorite, purely because it was just so different to anything I'd read before. And it was so interesting to be, I guess, welcomed or introduced to this world, that it made it a really fun and rich reading experience. That being said, like I said, they're all great stories, and I really did love them. I am going to reread them. Who knows, if I'm still doing a podcast in a few years' time, I might do a reread and, bring a whole fresh take to the series. I have consistently rated them 4.5s, I think, and I'm pretty happy. I think it's a 4.5 out of 5 in terms of series, even though I don't really understand what happened. And I absolutely love that, because it makes me all the more eager to reread them again. Now I've just kind of got to hold off and be patient and give them enough time to sort of stew within myself before I start to, reread them again. So that was Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, 4 books. Thanks so much for coming along. Now it's time to announce the next fantasy series I will be doing. Okay, so what fantasy series am I going to do now? I found out after the first episode of Book of the New Sun that Gene Wolfe and this author were actually incredibly good friends. It is none other than Ursula K. Le Guin's series, the Earthsea series, the first 4 books. Picked this up probably 2 months ago now, and absolutely been dying to get into it. It is only 600 pages or 650 pages for the first 4 books, which are the first 4 books that I'm going to be reading for the series. So it doesn't feel like it's long enough to do spread over 4 months. I think that would annoy me, because I do like reading fantasy. So I'm going to see if I can do 2 books an episode and read 2 books an episode. I'm saying maybe because I haven't started reading this yet, and it could be an incredibly dense story that I want to take my time with it and spread it out over 4 months. But at this stage, I think I'm going to do it over 2 months and do 2 books an episode. just because if it's a really good series, I don't want to be holding back and only reading sort of 150 pages a month. I will definitely want to start cracking on. So Earthsea, the first 4 books by Ursula K. Le Guin. Very much looking forward to getting into this. I've never read any Le Guin before, but, you know, very well regarded, very well respected author. So very, very excited to get into that. Well, here we are at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening to the end. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have enjoyed it. As always, if you would like to like and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate that. But if not, that's okay. I will, well, maybe not, but hopefully I will see you next time. See you guys.